Yesterday it was all Manafort and the indictments. Today it's all the terror activity in New York City.
Yeah. All right. Thanks to everybody for being here. We will, of course, be right back here tomorrow again at noon Eastern Time. Now, here's Harris.
And we'll begin with a Fox News alert. Terror returns to New York City, and the suspect has pledged his allegiance to ISIS. This is Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. 8 people are dead, 12 injured, some in critical condition. A truck mowed down pedestrians on a busy Manhattan bicycle path yesterday afternoon, just blocks from Ground Zero. Witnesses say the attacker yelled Allahu Akbar before he was shot and captured by police. Here's a Manhattan chef who was leaving work.
2 gentlemen run over by the pickup truck.
And the noise you heard was the truck plowing?
No, a lot of females screaming. I mean, it's Halloween, but it was an eerie scream, because there was one female that I saw near the body. She must have seen it actually happen, because she just kept screaming, and it was
horrifying.
Yeah.
The NYPD says the suspect, who came to the United States from Uzbekistan in 2010, had been planning the attack for some time.
It appears that Mr. Sapov had been planning this for a number of weeks. He did this in the name of ISIS. He appears to have followed almost exactly to a T the instructions that ISIS has put out in its social media channels before, with instructions to their followers on how to carry out such an attack.
Let's go live now to Lower Manhattan, the anchor of America's Newsroom, Bill Hemmer. Bill?
Yeah, Harris, good afternoon. That last voice you heard there was John Miller. Works with the NYPD. We talk a lot about this city having the best of the best. John Miller's been on the trail of radical Islam for more than 20 years. He was a producer and reporter to ABC News before the next wrinkle in his career, which is working for the NYPD. He interviewed Osama bin Laden back in the late 1990s. When he speaks, Harris, he speaks with authority. I thought some of the best information from that whole briefing came from John Miller. Multiple knives, he confirms, inside that truck. A number of weeks. He was planning this, as we heard there, and followed it to a T for what ISIS had planned, something you can get online. It's as simple as that for those around the world who want to access the information. With regard to security here in New York City, it's changing. I'll tell you why in a moment here. But that area where he accessed along that bike trail did not have barricades, the place where he entered or the place where he exited. And right now they've admitted that's something they're looking at right now to reassess. He's never been a suspect. He's never been a subject of a police or FBI investigation before, but they stressed that he will have connectivity to others who have been subjects based on investigations here in the past. They have visited more than 140 truck rental agencies over the past 2 years, and as of 2 weeks ago, they say they were in contact with some of them up to then. What they told them, how to be aware, what to recognize, we do not have specifics, Harris, but this is something people like John Miller have been on now when you go back to the attacks in Berlin, Germany, and Nice, France, and in London, England. The notes, handwritten in Arabic, as I mentioned, symbols and words on them, one of which includes a phrase about ISIS enduring forever. Harris, there's a big marathon in 4 days. It's the New York City Marathon. 50,000 runners, 26 miles, 5 different boroughs. How do you keep the entire route safe? Based on the events of yesterday, it's pretty near impossible, Harris.
Yeah, you know, it's a huge task at all times, and then you had so much going on late yesterday anyway. I mean, you were near several schools in that area, and it was Halloween. Many people's children were already celebrating Halloween during the daytime, so some in their costumes. I mean, this was a festive time, and you saw New York do what New York does, Bill, and that is pick up and go on as best it can. It was it permeated every conversation that I was near last night, I'm certain for you as well. But talk with me, if you can, about what the scene looks like when you do go on, because it's a hotbed of activity already down there.
Yeah, there's a park off to my shoulder here. There's a playground for a local school off my right over here. You can probably hear the kids on the playground now. Police officers moving back and forth along the road behind me. FBI agents just went toward the truck, which, by the way, Harris, still sits there at that intersection now 21 hours later. What I think is remarkable about the events of yesterday, we now have a specific timeline, and it goes like this. 2:06, the rental of the vehicle took place in Passaic, New Jersey. At 3:04, 58 minutes later, he entered that bike lane, which, as you know, on the west side of New York City has been built up to such an enormous degree over the past 10 years, parks and recreation areas. And on a beautiful sunny day, it's one of the places where you want to be in New York City. But if you're on that bike path and that rental truck is coming at you, there is very little room for escape, as we found out from the victims who are now being treated in local hospitals and those that have lost their lives as a result. Harris.
Yeah, you talk about it, and as you're saying that, Bill, we were able to put up the video, and you can see on either side there's a tree line. So there really isn't a whole lot of room for people to say, right as you were pointing it out, for them to move out of the way. And so we have seen this in other vehicular type attacks like this around the world, because this seems to be among the bloodthirsty Islamic State savages. This seems to be their new course of action now, how they'll attack us. There's simply no latitude for people to kind of jump out of the way. I am curious, before I let you go, just in terms of what the activity is right now with the scene and with police. I mean, you see them there, they're standing, but they are carrying out an active investigation. What are you able to glean?
I'd say we were here at 7 o'clock this morning. It was quite remarkable to me to see how much this neighborhood functions. I mean, there's families all over the place. There's a lot of corporate activity too, with folks coming to work for business in the morning. The subway was jammed, with the exception of the multiple media crews out here and the lights we have set up and the intersection that's now blocked off about 150 yards to my right. You pretty much know that, or think that the city was functioning and working the way it normally does. It's quite remarkable to think that the Halloween parade went off last night the way it did, with 100 spectators up and down 6th Avenue, and that's just to the north of here. And I made the comment earlier, Harris, I don't know how you feel about this, but for a city to function with a high level of normalcy only hours after an event like this, it puts us in a different mind frame, and it's almost, we enter that area where we start to think, well, this is to be expected, perhaps. I know a lot of people are not going to accept that answer here, but when you have a Uzbeki who has no police record, who likely had, so far as we know, a valid driver's license and had the ability to rent that truck, well, how do you get in front of that person? And the only way to really do it is to get inside the mind and the heart of that individual. And you can only do that if you're in the local mosque in Patterson or Passaic, New Jersey, where this crime originated. That's a really difficult task now for law enforcement going forward. And they say they learn from every incident, and we're going to learn something from this, certainly. But how we react and how we adapt and how we respond is truly key to what we are as New Yorkers and what we are as Americans, Harris.
Yeah, you've given us a lot to talk about. You mentioned the mosque situation. So many of these would-be attackers know that they're being watched very closely at those mosques. So now you have to kind of determine how much their actions are changing because they know they're being watched as well. Bill Hemmer, from the scene of the worst attack on New York City, terror attack since 9/11. Thank you very much. Well, investigators are taking that deep dive into the attacker's background. What will they be looking for? What links does he have or did have to terror organizations? Plus, just how valuable is all of that? And the fact that he's still alive, what you can work with. Let's bring in now former NYPD Detective Pat Brosnan. Pat, always good to see you and get your expertise even at tough times like today. Bill Hemmer just gave us a couple things I want to follow up on. He gave us a timeline. 2:06 Eastern Time, the rental of the vehicle in Passaic, New Jersey. 3:04. 58 minutes. In daytime traffic, I know because I travel in from Jersey to New York daily, and I'm sometimes going back at that time. He pretty much had to just make his way here. What are they looking for along that timeline?
Well, they're just seeking to cobble together, Harris, the breadcrumbs to establish a factual-based timeline for the entire event. But the reality is, and to your point and to Bill's point, we're going to learn a real lot from this, because this is not just a unicorn. This is a unicorn on a rainbow. We have captured a Ryan Nash, the perpetrator of the largest and the most deadly terror attack since the towers got hit on 9/11. This is huge, absolutely huge. We're going to be able to gather information and glean intelligence from him that is unprecedented. Spectacular job by the NYPD, and fantastic that this depraved coward is alive and sitting in a hospital room. And unlike the Tsarnaev brother up in Boston, wasn't shot in the throat. He's able to talk. That's a huge factor.
Yeah, and Judge Napolitano will be joining us this hour to talk about the now future timeline of what lies ahead for this suspect and how immediately that journey will start, even while he's still in the hospital with, we're told, non-life-threatening injuries. You know, you heard Bill Hemmer talking about what is really a crime scene, but people have gone back to their... How difficult is it to scoop up the information you need? And I see the tape, but let's face it, it's a city of north of 8 million people, including all the boroughs, and some of them are doing business and some of them are going to school in that very area.
Well, you know, from an investigative perspective, Harris, what's really of great interest to the investigators is not so much establishing the timeline, which is relatively easy because there's cameras and there's fact-based breadcrumbs that they can cobble together to create a cogent timeline. What's of extreme interest to them and is extremely rare is the fact that they can gather from this guy, they can trade some stuff relative to his upcoming time in a supermax, things like a view, things like food, things like that, and they can find out, are there other plots pending? Who, if anybody, was involved? Co-conspirators, influencers, who influenced him? Big stuff. Very, very important from an investigative perspective.
The truck is still sitting at the intersection 21 hours and 6 minutes later, or 11 minutes later. What are they looking at in terms of the forensics of that crime scene right now?
Well, they want to sanitize that truck. They want to basically take a complete deep dive, as you mentioned earlier, on his background. They want to deep dive on that truck. They want to see if there are any other fingerprints, any other cellular scrapings, any other DNA that would establish who else was in that truck, perhaps with him, perhaps before him, and they might be able to tie together a co-conspirator angle. Maybe able to establish that he wasn't acting alone, because that's of extraordinary concern to the investigators.
Yeah,
so that truck will speak tales from where it's parked. It will tell tales, which is awesome. Forensic tales. You
talk about trying to prevent this, and everybody is saying, from law enforcement to, you know, at the federal level to the state and local level, that you pretty much would have to have known personally this person to know what he would do. And they've even talked with people who knew him who say, no, you couldn't have seen this coming. What is your take on keeping an eye on certain people, and when does it encroach that part where it's just impossible?
So, great question. Here's the thing. My take is very simple. If you know someone, you see someone, you observe someone, and their behavior either radiates or suggests or manifests radical Islamic leanings, pick up the phone and make a notification. The authorities want to know that. So do not suffer from the deadliest of all the sins, which is really Islamophobia. Recognize that if you err on the side of caution, it's a good thing. Okay, because the police need this information, because otherwise a guy like this, he's not even a needle in a haystack. He's actually a needle in a pile of needles until such time as he goes overt, and then his actions and his statements become symptomatic of what we're looking to ascertain. Real problem. Needle in a pile of needles.
The words that stick, unicorn on a rainbow, you say, capturing this person alive and what they can glean from him. Pat Brosnan, formerly of the NYPD, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So this deadly New York City terror attack has reignited now the debate over immigration. The suspect was admitted to the United States on a diversity visa. President Trump says just a few minutes ago, he said this again during Outnumbered. We took him live from the cabinet meeting room. He said he's going to end that program. So is it putting our country at risk, that program? Judge Andrew Napolitano returns from the Outnumbered couch to talk to us about the diversity visa program and more. Plus, terror unleashed in the shadow of the World Trade Center. We've been talking about it, covering it. How should lawmakers respond? We'll talk directly with a New York City congressman who helps oversee the government's anti-terror policies. And one witness describes the horror that unfolded.
It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I hear all the noise, and when I go back and I look, I see, you know, a truck a few more blocks down going down the bike path. And for some reason, I went that way. And when I went that way, I seen a couple of bodies laying right there in the bike path.
Fox News Alert, new reaction now after the deadliest terror attack in New York City since 9/11. The suspect plowed his rental truck onto a busy bicycle path in Lower Manhattan yesterday, killed 8 people, injured 12, some still in critical condition hospitalized. Police say he acted in the name of ISIS. One witness described it this way.
I saw a guy who's like had 2 guns on his hand, and he was just running in the middle of the street. And then I heard like 5-6 gunshots, and that time I was down because I didn't know which part the gunshots coming from. So I was scared. And there was like 4 or 5 students more on the bridge. They're all scared. So when I again watched in the screen, I saw the guy with the 2 guns. He was in the street.
The gunshots he heard were police taking that suspect down. He's hospitalized today, expected to survive. Let's bring in New York City Congressman Daniel Donovan Jr. He's the chairman of the subcommittee on the Homeland Security Committee that deals with emergency preparedness and response. We have talked about a lot of different things this week recently, mainly taxes and now terror. I saw you on social media last night getting the word out. What are you telling your citizens here that you represent and even wider here in New York?
Well, first of all, our prayers are with the families of the lost, the people who were perished yesterday and those who are still trying to recover from their injuries. We're asking people to be diligent. A lot of the information that we get, Harris, a lot of things that allow us to protect New York City and the rest of our nation is information that we get from individuals. They see something that they're uncomfortable with, as your prior guest said, please say something. Overcautious. If there's nothing there, there's no harm. But some piece of information somebody might be able to give us might protect lives in America.
No, I was in Europe this summer, and they've had so many attacks. It's been just a bloodthirsty course that the terrorists have had there. And one of the differences that I wondered about when I saw this yesterday, having walked along and ridden my bike along that path, was, are we getting to the point where we have more metal pylons as they do in Europe? And it does impede your freedom, if you will, but is that something that's now at an emergency level being talked about?
It is, actually. Myself and another congressman from New York have dropped a bill that would allow New York City Police Department and other law enforcement entities to buy pylons out of a fund. As we saw what happened in Times Square when that individual drove his car through a pedestrian area. Pylons will protect and defend areas in which pedestrians and bikers like yesterday were using. So yes, that's certainly a help, but being diligent and notifying law enforcement authorities about what you see has been a great aid to us throughout. This was the first real attack on New York City since September 11th of 2001. And Harris, New York remains the #1 terrorist target in the world. We can't be fooled by that. We are still the target of our enemies, and we have to do everything to protect our citizens.
You know, Congressman, a few weeks ago we got a heads up that the terrorists, particularly perhaps Al-Qaeda, the ISIS terrorists there, would want to hit our aviation. They would want to hit us in a new way, hit us in a continued way. We have nothing to suggest yet that this would be command and control, where ISIS said, go do this, and this person went and did it. But we talk about it in terms of being ISIS-inspired. Where are we in our journey along this, and how does that announcement play a role maybe in what we saw yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, we know from the evidence that was gathered by the law enforcement authorities that there was a pledge to ISIS in a note that was left in the truck. It was an ISIS flag. We know that Inspire magazine, something that people who are radicalized follow, ISIS leaders tell them how to attack individuals. We've done a real good job protecting our hard targets, the Empire State Building, the Capitol here in Washington. But it's these isolated attacks that we are now challenged to defend against. And using a vehicle, this is the 13th or 14th time in the Western Hemisphere where a vehicle was used in order to assault individuals. So these are more challenging times, but our law enforcement people do a wonderful job. New York City Police Department, the FBI, they mine the internet, look for chatter that will give us leads to people like this individual yesterday who attacked the citizens of our great city. And so we're doing a good job, but what we do in our committee is we ask those experts, those people on the ground, those people in charge of protecting us, what tools do you need to better protect the citizens of this nation? And that's how we determine what legislation to put forth so that we could be an aid to those people on the ground every day.
All right, so I took a note on the bill for pylons to purchase those. I'll be watching to see if that and when that moves forward. One last question for you, because you mentioned Inspire magazine and some of the ways that these bloodthirsty savages talk to each other about wanting to kill those of us here in the Western Hemisphere and beyond. One of the things they said that they would be considering a hard target would be our Thanksgiving parade. You, I think, are the only congressman in New York who lives in Manhattan. Correct me if I'm wrong. This falls in a jurisdiction, though, that's even wider for those of us who come from out of state to go to that parade. Are you looking at that any differently after yesterday?
I am actually a Staten Island resident, Harris, but I'm also the only Republican member of Congress from New York City. So, and yes, there'd be great protection. People should go to the parade. People should participate in the marathon this weekend. New York City Police Department and the FBI do a wonderful job. We have to continue to live our lives. We just have to be diligent in doing it. But the women and men of our law enforcement community do a great job in protecting us. We have to continue to live our lives. We can't let these folks defeat us. We will defeat them. And we'll defeat them by protecting our freedoms, which making them jealous of us.
All right. Congressman Donovan, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
Nearly 24 hours since the deadly truck rampage in Lower Manhattan, and authorities now say the suspect was planning his attack for weeks. Coming up, a live report from where it happened. And President Trump is talking immigration in the wake of the attack, but New York's governor says it's too soon to do what he calls politicize the incident, and is instead calling on New Yorkers to unite. Judge Andrew Napolitano is back from Outnumbered, our couch, to weigh in on that. Stay close.
That's what makes New Yorkers special. That strength, that resilience, that ability to be undeterred in the face of ugliness and the actions of a depraved coward, because that's what this was. This was the actions of a depraved coward.
Details now coming in on the deadly terror attack here in New York City. Authorities now say the suspect was plotting his attack for weeks and that they recovered a note written in Arabic. The text roughly translates to, quote, Islamic State would endure forever. This is witnesses at the scene say what happened.
A car and a school bus collided, and people in the school bus got hurt. And so a guy got out of his car and challenged the guy. He was running around with a gun, and so police from Stye came out, and then people called the cops, and so they were coming in, and the guy fired a couple shots before, and then there's a shootout between the police and the guy.
Let's go now live to the scene in Lower Manhattan with David Lee Miller. David Lee.
Harris, just a short time ago, police described in detail more information about the suspect in this case, and they say that he followed the ISIS playbook to a T. The Deputy Commissioner for Intelligence and Counterterrorism, John Miller, says he seems to have followed the regimen prescribed. There's also a published report at this hour. Authorities are looking into the possibility that Sayfullo Saipov may have made a couple of dry runs, the last one possibly as recently as Saturday. He is now recovering from a gunshot wound in a New York City hospital. He has been interviewed by authorities, but they have not said what, if anything, he has disclosed. Authorities say that he flew, for the most part, under the radar when it came to law enforcement.
Mr. Saipov has never been the subject of an NYPD Intelligence Bureau investigation, nor has he been the subject of an FBI investigation, and we know that through our work with the JTTF and Bill Overnight. What we are looking for is how has he touched the subjects of other investigations? What is his connectivity to those people? He will have some connectivity to individuals who were the subjects of investigation, though he himself was not.
It's now been, Harris, nearly 24 hours since this rampage got underway. Authorities say they are now executing a number of search warrants. This now as the death toll stands at 8. 5 of those killed were from Argentina. There was 1 woman from Belgium and 2 Americans. We are told now that among the dozen injured, at least 1 person at this hour is still in critical condition. This as the investigation continues 23-plus hours after the rampage ended. Harris.
David Lee Miller, thank you very much. President Trump is calling on Congress to take action. As we learn, the suspect came to the United States through the Diversity Visa Program. It's a lottery that includes countries with low rates of immigration to come to the U.S. Here's the president just moments ago from the cabinet room.
I am today starting the process of terminating the Diversity Lottery Program. I'm going to ask Congress to immediately initiate work to get rid of this program. We want a merit-based program where people come into our country based on merit. And we want to get rid of chain migration. We're being stopped by Democrats because they're obstructionists. And honestly, they don't want to do what's right for our country.
The president blamed Senator Chuck Schumer for the diversity program, which was part of a bill he introduced nearly 30 years ago. Meanwhile, Schumer is hitting back, accusing the president of pitting Americans against each other.
I have always believed that immigration is good for America. I believe it today. President Trump, instead of politicizing and dividing America, which he always seems to do at times of national tragedy, should be bringing us together and focusing on the real solution.
Back from the outnumbered couch, Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst.
What a great assignment to be on the couch and with you after.
Well, I'm grateful for you being here. Some things rang true. We'll get to the politics in just a second. Right. A dry run Saturday. You said, oh boy, we both got chills when we heard that first being reported. And now to hear more details come out against what my guest first part of this hour, Pat Brosnan, formerly of the NYPD, called the unicorn on a rainbow. Who's the suspect?
Well, Pat is very, very clever. He's also, in his choice of words, he's also very experienced and very competent. Pat, I believe, agrees with the arguments that you and I were making in the previous hour on the couch. The government does not focus its surveillance on suspicious people. It gathers information from everyone. If it focuses on suspicious people, just put his name in a computer. You'll see it pop up 3 or 4 times. As John Miller, the deputy commissioner in charge of intelligence for the NYPD, said, he's never been investigated, he's never been prosecuted, but he's closely associated with people who have. Add that to the dry run. Add that to the digital acquisition of information from ISIS about how to use a truck to kill people, and he could have been stopped. Reason he wasn't stopped? Information overload. The government gathers too much information from too many innocent people and doesn't have the time to sift through the bad.
Real quickly, the suspect, Miranda rights, yes, maybe lawyered up at this point, but if they want to go on, what has to happen?
He'll get a lawyer immediately as soon as he asks for one. The government cannot speak to him unless he is in physical condition intelligently to waive a lawyer. But the most important step will be who's going to try him. The state of New York, which means the Cy Vance and the prosecutors downtown, or the federal government, where he's more likely to face the certainty of conviction and the more severe penalty.
All right, let's move on to the politics. Never thought that we probably would talk about it this soon, but it came up almost immediately. We can talk about how and when. The mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, said at a news conference that we took just a short time ago that this was a plot that was failed. Those are unfortunate words because, I mean, social media just lit up.
Yeah, I think it's an unfortunate choice of words. I think what the mayor meant was it failed to break the spirit of the city of New York. Or I think maybe he meant this guy intended to kill hundreds, and because he crashed into a school bus with children on it who were slightly injured, it stopped him from the rampage he had started.
The bigger umbrella, though, is Chuck Schumer and the President of the United States.
You know, you can't blame Chuck Schumer for this. This was a statute that was passed overwhelmingly with support from both parties in both houses of Congress and signed by a Republican president, and it worked. And we're talking about 9 years before 9/11. It was a different world when they passed this statute.
All right, let's talk about something that is breaking news right now. They have just released, the CIA, to the public nearly 470,000 additional files recovered in May 2011 in the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The significance.
I have not read all 470,000 documents.
I did not think you would, because this just happened like 40 minutes ago.
I tried. You asked me to do it as soon as the other show was over. Kidding. These documents concern the finances, how they got their finances, and, very important, the disputes within the organization that the CIA was able to exploit.
Yeah, it's interesting, too. Osama bin Laden's personal journal and more than 18,000 document files. You and I were reading through this together.
Right. Obviously, there's nothing there that's going to compromise sources. There's nothing in there that's going to compromise national security, or the CIA wouldn't be releasing it. This is obviously going to reinforce the ideas about Osama bin Laden and his organization that we have already been told by the government, or they wouldn't be releasing these documents.
Some home videos of him, apparently Al-Qaeda home videos, that sort of thing, but you say nothing to compromise. We'll bring you back once we have read at least 400,000 of them.
Do I have to do this reading this afternoon?
You know what? You read faster than anybody I know. You're my hero.
Pleasure to be here.
Judge Knapp's, thanks.
Thank you.
New details on the accused terrorist in the deadly New York City truck attack. His links to at least 3 other states. What we're learning now. And this is the 9th ISIS-inspired or directed attack using a vehicle since July of last year. So could these kinds of attacks be the new normal? And is it possible to protect soft targets? A Homeland Security expert joins me next.
The first thing I saw was a man laying on the ground, face down in the middle of the street. He was surrounded by police officers. It appeared that he was injured. And right next to him was a man who was being arrested. He wasn't putting up a fight. He was on his knees, hands behind his head.
In yesterday's deadly truck attack in Lower Manhattan. The search for clues, of course, continuing as we learn more about the man police say mowed people down, innocent people on Halloween Day. Laura Ingle is live there. Laura?
Hi, Harris. Well, we've been watching investigators go in and out of apartment number 9 all morning long. And I want to give you some perspective and show you what we're talking about. That red brick building just behind me, you can see some of the media trucks there. This is where investigators say Saypov reportedly lived with his wife and 2 children. Actually, we're hearing now he may have 3 children, but we're working to confirm that. And about 2 hours ago, we saw FBI agents come out of the unit with a large black garbage bag, presumably containing evidence from his apartment, and take it away in an SUV. Investigators descended upon the area around 2 a.m. They came in a convoy and they began gathering evidence both inside the unit and around the apartment, which quite literally butts up against the back of the Omar Mosque, which he reportedly attended. Now, locals say that they saw Saypov frequently talk with people on the street corner here between his apartment and the mosque, but no one really knew him all that well because he had only moved into the area a few months ago. Now, while there have been some reports that he frequently prayed at this mosque, some mosque members that we've been talking to today say they had not seen him before at all, and their community has come together to kind of compare notes and to see who knew him at any time. The one thing that they can say everyone can agree on is that this act does not represent their ideals.
From the people I've spoken to, we're all horrified. It's not something, I mean, when you wake up in the morning and you look at the news and you say, hey, that's my mosque, you know, that's a place that I'm very familiar with. It's heart-wrenching, really.
And while the federal investigators have left the scene for now, we do see local and state investigators here as well and keeping the scene kind of contained for the moment. Harris, back to you.
Laura, thank you very much. New questions about the spread of the ISIS and the techniques used in this. The terror group has been using all along. Authorities say the attacker who plowed his rental truck in a New York City street yesterday and killed 8 people followed the ISIS playbook to a T and was radicalized right here in our country. The rampage in New York would be the 9th ISIS-related vehicular attack worldwide in the past 18 months, along with Barcelona, Paris, London, Stockholm, Berlin, here in the United States at Ohio University, State University, and in the French city of Nice. Michael Balboni is a former Homeland Security advisor for New York State. Good to have you here. All right, let's start off right where we were there, because you said, look, let's talk about the fact that he would have gone to a mosque. We don't know, though, if that's where he was radicalized, because the mosques now know, these imams know they're being watched.
So after the days after 9/11, there was a real concern about what activities were happening in and around the city of New York, and there was a concerted effort to try to find out information. Matter of fact, there was lawsuits later on about the surveillance techniques on these mosques. But what we found later on was, when we looked back on these programs, was that the bad guys knew that the mosque was being targeted. And therefore, the last thing that they were going to do, if they had any tradecraft, was going to go in that mosque and stand up and say things, or be a part of that, create a cell there, because it's a finite location and you're going to be surveilled. So we don't know that that would happen, and that would be counter to what common sense would tell us.
All right. Does it make this person or anybody more dangerous when they spend more time plotting and planning? Because we're hearing that there was a dry run on Saturday. Right. He's out in the open then.
Right. So every time, so pre-operational surveillance is the term of art for people who want to go case the joint, as it were, and find out what their target is. And so that indicates that this person was very serious for a period of time, which goes to whether or not this was more organized than it appeared to be, just wasn't some kind of random emotional act. But secondly, it also gives security officials the ability now to go back and take a look at cameras and take a look at what his timeline is. In Lower Manhattan, the Lower Manhattan Security Initiative, a web of cameras and license plate readers where you can track people's movement back and forth. So I'm very confident that security officials are going to be able to track exactly where he went, how he went. And then the question is, well, who was he talking to during that time?
Interesting. Okay. The president today brought up Gitmo. He was asked at the very end of an availability talking with him in the cabinet room today, and he said, Gitmo, is it still on the table? He was asked, and he said, well, it would be something he would be looking at. You know, you catch people on the battlefield, you put them in Gitmo. Is America becoming more of a battlefield?
You know, an enemy combatant was the individuals, constitute the individuals who were pulled out of the Middle East into Iraq and put into Gitmo. The question becomes, what would be the ability to utilize that type of a program on someone who's here on U.S. soil, perhaps a U.S. citizen? You know, if we take a look at the last terrorism events in the United States, whether it's San Bernardino or Pulse nightclub shooting or the Boston Marathon, these folks were citizens. They were here. So we don't have laws where you can do preventative detention. And so therefore, to be able to put someone in on the suspicion of doing a terrorism act, you know, the law does not support that domestically. You would have to have an overt act, which case you prosecute.
Would you use it as a deterrent, though, in terms of capturing people? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. I mean, clearly it's going to be talked about. One last thought on that, and then I have a quick last question.
So I don't believe that the Constitution of the United States, you know, you have the right to be innocent until proven guilty, and so therefore I don't think that that this would apply in a Gitmo situation here for individuals operating here on the soil.
Track record right here in New York and the United States for court cases?
We haven't lost. You know, just the problem when they bring a case against an individual accused of a terrorism act, they haven't lost.
Okay. Michael Balboni, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Some of the victims of the New York terror attack killed while they were thousands of miles away from home. What we're learning about them and those who were injured as well, and how doctors are treating them right now. Dr. Mark Siegel joins us with new information. Stay close.
We were having class, and a couple of my classmates, we heard the shots, and then we went to the window, and we seen two of the bodies lying down. They covered the body, but it's windy, so the cover kept flying off, so we seen the guy huddle up. A bunch of bicycles, they were on the floor. It was really chaotic.
Developing details now as we learn more about the victims of the New York City terror attack from yesterday. 6 of the 8 people killed died at the scene. Several others are still trying to recover from some pretty gruesome injuries, as you might imagine. Argentina's foreign ministry identified 5 of those killed and 1 who was injured as Argentine citizens. They were part of a group of tourists who had traveled to New York to celebrate their 30-year high school reunion. Dr. Mark Siegel is a professor of medicine at NYU Langone and Fox News contributor. Great to see you today. Let's start with the conditions, because I know you have some connections and you've been able to find out some things.
Well, you said 8 passed away. Unfortunately, 2 were dead on arrival at Bellevue Hospital, is what I heard from my sources there. And of the ones that survived, one of them had a chest tube put in, is now doing quite well. Lung had dropped, got reinflated. Another one had damage to the spleen, and they actually use a technique now where they use an angiogram to actually cauterize the spleen and keep you from needing surgery, and they saved the spleen in another patient. Those 2 are doing really well. A third was a teen, and she was actually transferred to another hospital and is in the ICU but is expected to do okay. The fourth is a woman who unfortunately, tragically suffered amputations, had to have that done, and is in danger of being paralyzed, expected to survive. So those are the ones that I know about and have heard about. All of those will survive, but you can see these are extensive injuries.
Yeah, I want to pop up and be sensitive as we do this, because out of context, this looks different. But as we talk about it, when we pop up what those bicycles look like, if the bicycle looks like that, what kind of injuries are we talking about? I mean, it's heartbreaking to think of.
And I can relate to that trail. I've ridden my bicycle there. I've trained on that trail. You know, a lot of it has to do with speed. Harris, if you're hit at 50 miles an hour with a truck, you go flying. And even though everyone has to wear a helmet, and we tell them that, even if you're wearing a helmet, head injuries, you're at risk of that. You know, you can get caught in the metal, you can get thrown, fractures, musculoskeletal damage, you can have spinal cord damage. So those are the things you really worry about when you're thrown through the air off of a bicycle.
You mentioned Bellevue, and many of our viewers may know its level 1 trauma is one of the best in the country and the world.
Yeah, it's been doing this since 1869, sending out ambulances with horses, and it sees 1,500 patients a year in trauma, most this kind, blunt trauma, you know, this kind of trauma, and it is really something very specialized for this kind of thing.
All right, so you were talking about some of the injuries. You mentioned the one woman who is having to undergo some extensive surgery. So our prayers and our thoughts are with them. As a doctor, as you look at the situation just real quickly, can you diagnose kind of what's coming down?
I think that one thing you and I have talked about a lot here is post-traumatic stress. People that have been there, whether they're in the hospital, whether they're not in the hospital, whether they were hit, what, you know, how they've recovered, there's going to be big psychological problems from this. It take a long time to heal. With the perpetrator, you know, I've heard that he had a leg injury, that he is out of the woods, and that he's expected to go to the prison ward.
Non-life threatening.
Non-life threatening, so they should be able to question him.
Dr. Siegel, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.